You wake up and you already feel behind. Behind what exactly? Who knows? There isn't a rule book anymore. There isn't even a finish line. Just an endless scroll of other people being confident, humble, and somehow also millionaires at 23. You're supposed to have a brand, a purpose, a perfect morning routine, and a therapist-approved trauma toolkit, all before noon. And if you can monetize it, even better. This is what it feels like to live inside the identity collapse. You're not broken. You're just too many things. You were raised to be everything. Kind but assertive, driven but balanced, confident but humble. And no matter which version of yourself shows up, another part feels like a fraud. You're trying to win a game that never tells you the rules and changes the prize every week. We are a generation flooded with choices and crushed by meaninglessness. You can be anything, but you don't know what you are. You can build any life you want, but you feel like none of them will make you feel whole. Every time you move toward an identity, you immediately feel the pressure to pivot, to brand it, to question it, to explain it. And under all that choice, there's a low hum of dread. What if I never figure it out? Psychologist Erik Erikson called this identity versus role confusion. It's a stage of psychological development that we're supposed to pass through in adolescence. But guess what? We got stuck there. Not because we failed, but because the cultural ground beneath our feet has been dissolving for decades. We don't inherit stable roles anymore. There's no default path. No shared map. What we inherit instead is noise. A million expectations, none of which agree with each other. Hustle culture and self-care. Discipline and softness. Grind and mindfulness. Be a CEO, but also go touch grass. Be authentic, but also optimize your entire personality for online engagement. Zygmunt Bauman called this liquid modernity, a world where nothing is fixed and everything, including identity, must remain fluid to stay relevant. In a liquid world, you're not being, you're adapting. Constantly, and if you stop adapting, you risk irrelevance. The anxiety of that reality seeps in quietly, and suddenly you're changing jobs, aesthetics, and friend groups like you're just switching browser tabs. Here's the paradox. You're overwhelmed by too many identities, and yet you still feel like you don't have one. This is not a personal failure. This is cultural whiplash. Your grandparents likely had a single, coherent identity for decades. They were the teacher, the doctor, the father, the mother. These roles were stable. Not always fulfilling, not always fair, but at least defined. Today, our roles are more like trending hashtags. Here today, cringe tomorrow. You could be a crypto guy in March and a breathwork facilitator by April. No judgment, just observation. The problem isn't freedom. It's weightlessness. When everything is fluid, nothing holds you. When every role can be changed, none of them feel real. And that is what makes you feel so lost. And it gets deeper, because our online lives make identity performance inescapable. You don't just live life anymore. You document it, curate it, narrate it, share your healing arc, your morning routine, your latest I'm in my villain era post. The internet made us public figures in our own soap operas. And when your identity becomes content, it stops being a home and becomes a product. Your feelings become captions. Your decisions become engagement metrics. Your worth starts swinging with the algorithm. You feel lost not because you're behind, but because you're floating. You were never taught how to be, only how to perform. And so when the show ends and it's just you in your room, without an audience, the silence feels like failure. But it isn't. It's the beginning. Let's talk about the pressure to define yourself, quickly, confidently, and preferably in under 160 characters. We live in an age where ambiguity feels like failure, not knowing who you are. That used to be called adolescence. Now it feels like an existential crisis with a deadline. You're 24 and somehow expected to have a personal brand, a niche hobby, a career roadmap, and a trauma-informed therapist who also does astrology. So you try to figure it out. You take personality quizzes. You read productivity blogs. You change your haircut and call it reinvention. And for a second, you think, maybe this is me now. But then your algorithm feeds you something cooler, something more aesthetic, something with a better tote bag. And just like that, you feel behind again. This is the psychological weight of the paradox of choice, a term coined by Barry Schwartz. The more options we have, the harder it becomes to choose anything at all. We don't feel free. We feel frozen, terrified of choosing the wrong identity, the wrong passion, the wrong version of ourselves to present to the world. And so we keep browsing through life like it's a giant existential Netflix menu. We don't commit. We curate. We don't live. We perform. But here's the quiet truth. Identity isn't something you choose. It's something you notice. Something that emerges when you're not trying to impress anyone. It shows up in the things you do when no one's watching, in the moments that aren't shareable, in the preferences that aren't cool. And that's hard to trust because it feels too quiet, too subtle, not marketable. We've been taught that identity should be loud and legible, easily explained at parties or bios or dates. But real identity isn't always neat. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it doesn't match your aesthetic. Sometimes it doesn't get a lot of likes. Carl Rogers, a pioneer of humanistic psychology, spoke about the real self and the ideal self. The real self is who you are when you're being honest. The ideal self is who you think you're supposed to be. And the more distance there is between the two, the more anxious and disconnected you feel. Most of us are living in that gap. We wake up as ourselves, but immediately switch into the version we think will be accepted. And over time, we forget what the real one even feels like. Here's a question. When was the last time you did something just because it felt good, not because it fit your persona? When was the last time you didn't narrate your life in your head as if it were an Instagram caption? We need to give ourselves permission to be inconsistent, to change our minds, to have layers. Because identity isn't a brand, it's a biography. And your story is allowed to be weird, slow, confusing, contradictory. You don't need to fit into one box. You're not a serial. So next time you feel lost, maybe that's not a signal that something's wrong. Maybe that's the beginning of something true. The most freeing moment is when you realize you don't have to be anyone in particular. You don't need a tagline. You don't need to know your 5-year plan. You don't even need to know what you're doing next month. Being lost doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're still in motion. And that's what identity actually is. Not a destination, a direction, a movement, not something you build and protect, but something you reveal and revise. You're not a statue. You're a stream. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The more tightly you grip the need to be someone, the more you miss the joy of just being. Because maybe you were never meant to be a finished product. Maybe you were always meant to be an unfolding story. The world keeps telling you to pick a side, to be consistent. But consistency isn't integrity. Integrity is wholeness. And wholeness includes contradiction, change, even confusion. You can be a poet and a project manager, a skeptic who prays, a minimalist with 3 junk drawers. You don't have to shrink to fit. The people who matter will never ask you to. So when you feel lost, remember, there is no one path. There are many, and they all count. You don't have to find yourself. You just have to stop running from the one who's been here all along. Let that version breathe. Let them be weird. Let them not make sense all the time. Because when you stop performing and start listening, you'll notice something extraordinary. You were never empty, just crowded. And now, finally, you have room. That is not collapse. That is emergence. That is identity being born, not built. And you're doing just fine.